Loops. Loops are nothing but repetitive statements provided. It executes the block of code repeatedly. So in a program, if you have written some piece of code which is to be repeated, the control will enter into the loop, execute it for the number of times that is expected, and after its execution is done, it will continue with the rest of the code. Hence, it lessens the lines of code of your program. There are two main types of loops, pre-tested loop and post-tested loop. Now in pre-tested loop, it says that before me executing, like for and while, these are two pre-tested loop. They both are saying that before us to get executed, we will test the condition. If the condition is true, then only the control will enter in the loop and execute. As soon as the condition is false, we will take the control out of the loop. We will not let it execute the block and it will continue with the rest of the code. However, the post-tested loop says, which is do while loop, it says that I will execute my block once, at least once, and for the next iteration I will test the condition. If the condition is true, I will continue with the next iteration again. But if the condition is false, I will take the control out of the loop and continue with the rest of the code. So these are two main types, pre-tested loop and post-tested loop. Let us begin with the first pre-tested loop, which is for loop. For loop says that it will execute the block of code for number of iterations which is known well in advance. The syntax of for loop is, you have to first initialize the value, then specify the condition, and then change, either increment or decrement or change the value of the initialized iterator or a counter variable. So the syntax is for, use the pair of parentheses, give an initial value, semicolon, specify the condition, semicolon, change the value of the counter variable which was initialized. And then you will start the block of code, and here you will write the code, the body of the loop which should be executed. So let us see a simple example here. In main, you have for loop. So you can either create the variable before entering the for loop, or you can also initialize and declare the variable inside for loop as well. So both are fine with it. Now here in for loop, as you can observe, we have I equals to 1, which is an initialized value, semicolon, I less than equal to 5, which is the condition, semicolon, I plus plus, which is an incrementation for the counter variable I. Now for every iteration, the value of I is tested in the condition. If the condition is true, it will execute the block. If the condition is true, it will execute the block, and so on. So it is actually repeating itself. And as soon as the condition is false, it will not enter the for loop and jump out of the for loop to continue with the rest of the code. So let us see how this for loop is executing here. Initially, the value of I is 1. Condition is true? Yes. I will enter the for loop. It is saying printf. What to print? Iteration colon %d, so value of I is replaced here, which is value 1 on the output screen. \n means take the cursor to the next line. Now the condition is again tested. So before testing next condition, it is incrementing its value, which is 2. So value of I is overwritten with new value 2. 2 is tested, whether is it I less than equals to 5, like 2 less than equals to 5. Yes, it is. Condition is true. Enter the block. And wherever is the current cursor position, write the printf statement again, which is again say iteration 2. Now the value of I is incremented again, which is 3 overwritten. 3 is tested, whether it is less than equals to 5. Yes, it is. Again enter the block, execute the code like iteration 3. Again the value of I is incremented to 4. Condition is tested. Yes, it is true. Execute the block, return inside the for loop, which is iteration 4. Again increment the value of I, which is 5. Condition is true because it is mentioning less than equal to. So the value of I is considered true till the value of 5 is mentioned in it. Okay. So again enter the block and print on the output screen iteration 5. Now the value of I is overwritten to 6. Now the condition is false. So it is going to skip this block of code and jump to the next line and continue with rest of the code. Now it is very important that at some point of time the iteration must stop, so that condition must evaluate to false, so it will not go in an infinite mode of program. So it is important to let the condition go to a false state and continue with the rest of the code. So I hope it was easy for you to understand how for loop works here. So if you just observe and notice here, though we are getting a longer output on the output screen, the piece of code written is hardly 2 or 3 lines, which simply lets the control to execute loop. So this is the benefit of using loops in your program. Going ahead with while loop. Now while loop says that it will execute the body of loop if and only if the condition which is mentioned is true. As soon as the condition is false, it will stop executing. So we can say that in while loop we do not know number of iterations. It is purely based on the condition which is specified in the while. So as you can see, the simple syntax here, while condition and body of loop. Now while writing this while loop, we must take care of one thing. The condition that we want to specify must be either evaluated before while loop or initialize the value for it. And inside the body of the loop only, you must either change the value of the iterator so that it will change to either incrementation or decrementation or even perform some mathematical operations. So let us see its example here. In main, I have I equals to 1. So the value of I is initialized to 1 before entering the while loop. In while, I am testing the condition. Is value of I less than equal to 5? So let us create a variable table here. I equals to 1. Condition is true. Yes, it is. So enter the loop. Printf iteration. So again, it will print on the output screen iteration colon value of I, which is 1. Now here I am saying I++, which is incrementing the value of I by 1 only. So the value of I is now 2, overwritten from 1, now it has become 2. Condition is true. Yes. Now again enter the block, print the content, say iteration 2. Again increment the value of I, which is now 3. Value of I is becoming 3, overwritten by 2. And it is again entering into the block and execute the block like iteration 3. Value of I is again incremented to 4. Condition is true here also. So again it will execute, say iteration 4. Again the value of I is incremented to 5. As I said, it is less than equals to 5. Condition is still true. Yes, it is. So enter the block, print iteration 5. Now the value of I is incremented to 6. Now the condition is false and it will skip this block, take the control to the next line and continue with the rest of the code. So this is how while loop works. So as you must have observed here in detail, the initialization of for loop is taken before in while loop. Condition is written inside the parenthesis and incrementation or decrementation of for loop, which was written in the same line, is taken inside the block of the while loop itself. So you can alter the writing of your for loop into while loop, or even you can convert your while loop into for loop when you know number of iterations. If you don't know number of iterations, then in that case it is always recommended to use while loop instead of for loop. Okay. So these are two main types of pre-tested loop, for loop and while loop. Now let us understand do while loop. Now do while loop says that it is similar to while loop, where it guarantees that at least the body of the loop will execute one time regardless of the condition. So no matter if the condition is true or false, at least once the loop will be executed. Now for the next iteration, it will test for the condition. If the condition is true, it will execute, and if not, it will jump out of the do while loop. So do while loop is usually used when you want to specify at least once the loop's body must be executed. Now syntax of the do while loop says do opening curly brackets, closing curly brackets, the body of the loop to be written inside this block. After curly bracket, mention while condition, like while in parenthesis condition and a semicolon at the end. So this is important so that condition is tested. If the condition is true, it will re-execute the do, and if not, it will come out of it. So let us see the example here. Int I equals to 1. is an initial value of I. I'm saying do printf iteration. So no matter whatever is the value of I am not testing it. I am at least executing the block first, which is iteration 1, the printf statement as mentioned here. Now the value of I is incremented to 1 with I++. It is coming out of the block and checking the condition before either jumping out of it or re-entering into it. So while I less than equals to 5, yes, condition is true. So I has become 2 and condition is true. So it is re-executing again. So again it will print on the output screen, say iteration 2, I is incremented again while is testing the value which is overwritten to 3. Yes, it is true. Again, re-execute the do while block. Iteration 3. It keeps on repeating for next value. 4. Yes, the value is true. It is going to print iteration 4. Value of I is incremented again. 5. Yes, condition is true. It will again print the block like say iteration 5. Now value of I is 6, condition is false. Here in this case I is 6 and condition is false. So instead of going back, it will come out and execute rest line of the code. So this is how same logic can be written in different ways using for loop, while loop and do while loop. As you must have observed, the output which we have discussed in this session remains same. The writing of the same concept in different logics is changed using for loop, while loop and do while loop. You can also use comma operator in for loop. The comma operator is allowing us to have multiple expressions to be executed in the single statement, which again lessens the lines of code of our program. So it is usually used in for loop only. So for loop supports this execution of multiple operations in two states, like in incrementation, decrementation, or in initialization. Like in initialization, you can use this comma operator, give two different variables to initialize. Condition must be single only. And in incrementation, decrementation, you can again change the value of these two counter variables. Let us see an example here. In main, I have two variables I and j as a counter variable in for loop. Int I equals to 1 and j equals to 5. So these two variables are initialized using comma operator. Then I am specifying the condition I less than equals to 5. And the condition is execute the block of code till the condition of I is less than equals to 5. I am not testing the value for j, and after that I am changing the value of I is incremented and j is decremented. So initially the value of I and j are tested to true because I is less than equals to 5. It is going to enter the block I equals to. So what it is saying is to print I equals to. What is the value of I currently? 1. Print it on the screen. Then comma. J equals to. What is the current value of j? 5. Yes, print it. Fine. Okay. Now backslash n says take the cursor to the next line. Now the value of I is incremented and j is decremented. So I's value is becoming 2. J's value is becoming 4. Now I is less than equals to 5. Yes, it is true. So come on the output screen and print it again. Say I equals to 2, comma, j equals to 4. Now again I is incremented to 3. J is decremented to 1 value, which is again 3. I less than equals to 5. Yes, condition is true. Enter the block. Come to the output screen. Print the value of I and j. Again increment the value of I and decrement the value of j. Condition is true for I. Yes, it is. Again come to the output screen and execute the same block of code, which is I equals to 4 and j equals to 2. I is incremented again to value 5. J is decremented to value 1. Condition is still true. Print the content I equals to 5, j equals to 1. Now I is incremented to 6. In this case, now condition is false. Though j is decremented, again condition for I is tested to false, so it is coming out of the loop and the output stops here. So this is how you can use comma operator in your for loop to let multiple expressions to be evaluated in same line in same for loop. I hope you understood how this comma operator can be used in for loop for incrementation, decrementation, or for initializing multiple variables in the single statement. Moving ahead is using break statement. Now break statement is usually used to exit the loop prematurely. Like I know the number of iteration would be like say 7 times or 10 times or 9 times, but at some point of time I feel like at third iteration only it should go out of it, or at some specified condition it should discontinue executing the loop and come out of the loop. So you can use break keyword in that case. Now break keyword will simply take the control out of the block in which it is enclosed. It will not break the execution of entire program or your function. It will simply take the control out of the block in which it is enclosed. Let us see the example here. We have block main and we have block for, and break is written inside the for block. So let us see the example. I equals to 1, I less than equals to 5, I plus plus. I am testing the condition. If I equals to 3, break. In current situation, value of I is 1. So condition is false. I am skipping this part and printing the value. Say I equals to 1 on the output screen. Then I am saying increment the value of I. Now when the value of I is incremented, it is becoming 2. Yeah. So again here, if is not tested to true state, it is executing the for block printf I equals to the value of I, which is 2. Now I is incremented to 3. Now in this case, I equal to 3 is tested to true and it is saying break. Now break is simply jumping out of the for loop, not out of the main. Okay, so control is taken out of the for loop, continue with rest lines of your code and end your program. So this is how break can be used to prematurely discontinue your for loop or while loop. In a vice versa situation, we have continue keyword. Now continue statement is little different from break statement. Continue will help you to skip the current iteration and move to the next iteration. Now here, let us see the example. I equals to 1, I less than equals to 5, I plus plus. So value of I is 1, it is true. Enter the block. If I equal to 3, in our situation the value of I is not 3. So on output screen what we will get is I equals to 1. Now I is incremented to 2. It is overwritten with the value. Again here in this situation I is not equal to 3. So it will skip the if block and continue with the rest part of the for block, which is saying print value of I. So I equals to 2 is printed. Now the value of I is 3. In this situation, now the for loop is entering. Here it is saying I equal to 3. The condition is tested to true. So it is saying continue. Now in this continue, it is saying that don't go with the rest of the lines of for loop and go with the next iteration directly. So it will increment the value of I to 4. 4 is tested. It is less than equals to 5. Yes. 4 is again tested with if block. Now in this case it is not true and it is going to print the value of I, which is I equals to 4. Again increment the value of I, which is 5. 5 is again not satisfying this condition, so executing the for block in after if statement, which is I equals to 5 to be printed. Now the value of I is incremented to 6. Now 6 is not less than equals to 5, so condition is false and stop executing this for loop. Okay, so this is how you get the output here. I equals to 1, 2, 4, 5. It is skipping the iteration of third number because it is testing to true state and asking to continue. So this is how continue will help to skip current iteration and jump to the next iteration. So I hope you understood all important terminologies that we have seen in this session, like using loops, types of loop like for loop, while loop are pre-tested loop, and do while loop, which is post-tested loop. Let us summarize here. Iterative statements allows you to execute the block of code repeatedly. There are two main categories of loop. For and while loop are considered as pre-tested loop. Do while is considered as post-tested loop. You can use comma operator in for loop when you have multiple expressions to either initialize and increment decrement in your for statement. You can use break to exit your loop early and continue to skip the current iteration. So these are considered as control statements in your loops. And loops are fundamental for working with the repetitive tasks in your C programming. I hope you understood actual implementation of for, while and do while along with comma operator, break and continue keywords. So keep practicing. Thank you so much.